I just stared at the sheet of paper, my hands gripping it so tightly the edges were starting to crumple. The numbers seemed to vibrate on the page. It was a plain, black and white letter, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. The new rent figure was printed in bold, $7,900. My current rent was $2,100. My throat felt tight as I looked up. Across the polished oak of the dining table sat my sister, Megan. She wasn't glancing at her phone or admiring the view from the window. No, she was staring directly at me, and a small, satisfied smile was tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It's just business, Charlie," my father, Robert, said, taking an unbothered sip of his afternoon coffee. "You can't live on a family discount forever. This is the fair market rate." My mother, Eleanor, immediately nodded in agreement, looking at Megan as if she'd just unveiled a masterpiece. My own family was methodically pushing me out of the very home our grandmother had built. They looked at me and saw a line item to be optimized, a tenant to be bled dry. I felt my world shrink. I felt the sharp sting of betrayal. But as my fingers dug into the table's edge, I focused on something they couldn't see. They saw a pushover. They had no idea about the faint ink stain under my nail or the secret signature that was about to make their business plan spectacularly implode. Before I get into the whole story, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the globe. The silence that hung in the dining room wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, charged quiet you get moments before something terrible happens. I glanced back down at the letter. $7,900. "This has to be some kind of sick joke," I said, my voice wavering slightly despite my best efforts to keep it firm. I looked straight at Megan. She was dressed in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She took a delicate sip of her Pellegrino. "Charlotte," Megan said, using my full name, which she only did when she was being condescending. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just simple economics." Economics? I could feel the heat rising in my face. "I pay $2,100. That's not a small amount of money. You're increasing it by nearly $6,000. That's not economics, Megan. That's a soft eviction." My mother, Eleanor, let out a theatrical sigh from the kitchen counter where she was arranging appetizers. She always made herself busy when conversations turned difficult. "Charlotte, please," Mom said. "Let's just try to have a pleasant family gathering." "The portfolio?" I pushed my chair back, and it scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "This isn't a portfolio, Mom. It's my home. It's the apartment Grandma Iris gave me the keys to when I graduated college." "She gave you a rental agreement," my father corrected me without even looking up from his tablet. Robert Hayes was probably scrolling through stock tickers or some other data stream he deemed more vital than his daughter's impending homelessness. "She gave you a rental agreement, Charlotte, and agreements have end dates." "She told me I could live there as long as I needed to," I shot back. "She told me the rent would stay low because I was looking after the building for her." "Grandma is gone, bless her heart," Megan said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, as if she were explaining a sad fact of life to a toddler. "And the world moves on. The neighborhood is up and coming, Charlie. We have to adjust to the current market." "The market?" I repeated, incredulous. "Who do you think can afford nearly $8,000 a month for a one-bedroom in this area? None of the people who live there now." "We're hoping to attract a higher-tier tenant," my father said, finally gracing me with his attention. His eyes were as cold as polished stone. "Business isn't about feelings, Charlotte. It's about asset appreciation. Megan has a new vision for the Iris residence. She's going to convert it into luxury suites. Luxury suites? A laugh escaped me, but it was hollow and bitter. It's a century-old building. The pipes groan and the floorboards creak. That's its character. We want to enhance it, Whitney corrected, her tone sharp. Renovate, modernize. And to do that, you need capital. And that means raising the rents to reflect the property's true potential. I turned my gaze from my father to my mother. And you're fine with this? You're fine with her throwing me out on the street? Mom turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had on that pained expression she reserved for when I was making a scene. No one is throwing you out, dear. You just need to pay the new rate. Or, perhaps it's a good time to find something a little more in your price range, something cozier. My price range. I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes and willed them not to fall. I refused to cry in front of them. I work for the city library. I coordinate the youth literacy program. You know exactly what my price range is. Precisely, Megan said, and there it was again. That smirk, that tiny, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of her lips. She was savoring this. She'd always been the driven one, the predator. I was the bookish one, the one who preferred people to profits. Maybe you should have considered that before you got so comfortable living in a prime piece of real estate for next to nothing. I looked after Grandma, I said, my voice barely a whisper. For 5 years, I lived in that building to be near her. I fixed the leaky sinks. I supervised the repairmen. I dealt with the other tenants when the heat went out in the middle of winter. You did chores, Megan waved a dismissive hand. That's not management. Dad and I have been restructuring the holding company. We're the official managers now. You're not managers, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense tone. You're vultures. My father slammed his palm down on the table, making the glasses jump. That's enough, he boomed. Megan has stepped up to secure this family's future. What have you done, Charlotte? You play with books. You've been living on our goodwill. Goodwill, I whispered the word. I paid my rent every single month. I was never a day late. Below market rate, Dad snapped. That is goodwill, and the subsidy is officially over, effective the 1st of the month. I looked at them then, really looked at them. My mother, more concerned with her canapes than her daughter's housing crisis. My father, who looked at me as if I were a stock that had failed to perform. And Megan, who looked at me like I was an insect she was about to crush under her heel. They didn't see me. They didn't see Charlotte, their daughter, their sister. They saw a roadblock. I was the overly sentimental one standing between them and a bigger bank account. Grandma would have hated this, I said softly. Grandma didn't understand finance, Megan said, standing to straighten her designer dress. She was sentimental. Sentimentality doesn't pay the mortgage. She built that building, I said, with Grandpa, brick by brick. And now it's my turn to build it into something more profitable, Megan declared. She walked around the table and put a hand on my shoulder. It felt like a lead weight. Try not to take it so personally, Charlie. It's just progress. You should be happy for the family. We're all going to be very well off. I'm not a part of this family, I said, shrugging her hand away. Not anymore. I grabbed my bag. I didn't bother with goodbyes. I walked out of the house I'd grown up in, a house that now felt like a mausoleum for people I once knew. As I fumbled to get into my old hatchback, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I just sat there for a few minutes, focusing on my breathing. Business, not feelings. That's what Dad had said. They thought I was the weak one. They thought I would just cry, pack my books, and find some cramped studio on the outskirts of town then show up for Thanksgiving dinner as if nothing had happened. I wiped a tear from my cheek. I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but my jaw was set. They had no idea how wrong they were. The drive back to the city felt like a blur. It was a 40-minute trip, but my mind was stuck in a loop, replaying Megan's cruel smirk and my father's dismissive glare. When I pulled up in front of the Iris residence, a heavy knot tightened in my gut. The building was a classic, 4 stories of beautiful red brick with elegant stone detailing and large bay windows. It sat proudly on a corner in a neighborhood that was rapidly changing. A modern glass and steel condo building now loomed across the street. A trendy coffee shop had replaced the old laundromat on the corner, but our building, Grandma Iris's building, had a soul. It had flower boxes that tenants actually cared for. It had a solid oak front door with the nicks and scratches of 100 years of life. I parked and walked up the familiar stone steps. Usually stepping into the lobby felt like a warm embrace. It smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Today, it felt like a doctor's waiting room. The air was thick with a palpable tension. Mrs. Peterson was in the lobby, fumbling with her mail. She was 75 years old and had lived in apartment 2B for over 30 years. A tiny woman with a halo of white hair pinned into a perfect bun, she turned as the door creaked open. Her face was ashen. In her hand, she was holding a letter identical to mine. "Charlotte," she said, and her voice cracked. "Mrs. Peterson," I said, hurrying over to her. "Are you all right?" She held up the paper, her hands trembling. $7,900. "Charlotte, this can't be real. My Social Security. I don't even get $2,000 a month." A wave of nausea washed over me. "I know. I got one too." "But it's your family," she said, her eyes wide with confusion. "This is your building. It's not mine," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's my sister's and my parents'." "Where will I go?" she whispered, tears finally spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "I can't move, not with my hip, all my things. My Arthur passed away in that apartment, Charlotte. My whole life is in there." I put an arm around her thin shoulders. She felt as fragile as a bird. "We're going to find a way, Mrs. Peterson. Don't start packing anything yet." "They gave me 30 days, she sobbed. 30 days to find a new home. They said if I don't pay, they'll send the sheriff." "I won't let them send the sheriff," I lied. I had no idea if I could stop them, but I had to say something. I helped her to the elevator and watched the doors close. Then I took the stairs to my own floor, the 3rd. The hallways, usually peaceful during the day, were buzzing with quiet, panicked conversations. Doors were ajar. I saw the Santos family from 3A, Marco and Sophia. They had a toddler, Leo, and Sophia was heavily pregnant with their 2nd child. Marco was clutching the same notice, his face flushed with anger. Sophia sat on a packing box in the hall, her face buried in her hands. "Charlotte." Marco spotted me and strode over. "What in the hell is this? We just renewed our lease 3 months ago." "I know, Marco," I said, holding up my hands defensively. "I swear to you, I knew nothing about this until an hour ago." "Your family name is on the letter," Marco shouted, shoving the paper toward me. "Hayes Holdings, LLC. That's your family. You people are vultures. We have a baby due any day. Do you have any idea how much it costs to move?" "Marco, stop it," Sophia said from her box. "She lives here too." "Yeah, but for how long?" Marco spat. "She's probably getting a fat check for this, a nice cut of the profits while the rest of us get thrown out." "I am not in on this," I said, my voice firm. "They raised my rent too, to $7,900. Marco froze. He just blinked at me. "What?" I'm in the exact same boat, I said. It's my sister. She's trying to empty the building. The anger on Marco's face dissolved, replaced by a look of raw fear. Why? She wants to renovate, turn it into luxury apartments. She can't do that while we're all still here. So she's just erasing us? Sophia asked, her voice muffled. Yes, I said. I continued down the hall to my apartment, 3C. I could feel their desperate eyes on my back. Their panic felt heavier than my own. For 5 years, these people had trusted me. When a pipe burst, they called Charlotte. When a package went missing, they called Charlotte. I was the human face of the Hayes family to them. And now, my family was systematically destroying their lives. I unlocked my door and stepped into my apartment. It was filled with Grandma Iris's things. The vintage floral wallpaper in the entryway, the sturdy dark wood furniture. I had added my own touch. Books, mountains of them, on every available surface. But the soul of the place was hers. I sank onto the sofa. The silence in here was different from the silence at my parents' house. It wasn't an angry silence, it was a sad one. I pictured Mrs. Peterson being escorted out by sheriffs. I thought of Sophia Santos, 9 months pregnant, trying to pack up her life. I thought about Mr. Gable on the first floor, who was confined to a wheelchair. My family called this progress. My father called it fair market value. It wasn't business. It was a form of violence, wrapped up in legal jargon and sent through the mail. My gaze fell on a photo on the mantelpiece. It was me and Grandma Iris, taken about a year before she passed. She was in her favorite armchair, a mischievous grin on her face as she pointed a finger at the camera. I was sitting at her feet, reading a novel aloud to her. Grandma Iris was a tough woman. She grew up with next to nothing, worked 2 jobs, and saved every last dime to buy this building with my grandpa. She knew every tenant by name. She brought them chicken soup when they were sick. Iris never trusted suits, I whispered to the empty room. And then, a memory surfaced, flickering to life in my mind. It was years ago, when I was in my mid-20s. Grandma was getting older, more frail. We were in the basement together. She insisted on checking the boiler herself because she didn't trust the service companies. She had paused by a stack of old paint cans in a dark corner, tapping the wall with her cane. "Charlotte," she'd said, her voice raspy, "this building has good bones, but it has secrets too. Don't you ever forget that. If the wolves ever show up at your door, you don't run out the front. You go down to the foundation." I hadn't understood her at the time. I thought it was just one of her eccentric sayings. Grandma loved a good riddle, but now the wolves were not just at the door, they were inside the house. Megan and my parents, they were the wolves. I shot up from the sofa, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The foundation," I said aloud. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a flashlight from the junk drawer. I had no idea what I was looking for. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just desperate for a miracle that wasn't coming. But I couldn't just sit here and let the 30-day clock run out. I couldn't just stand by while Mrs. Peterson's life was dismantled. I had to do something. I left my apartment and headed for the stairwell. I went down past the lobby where the air was still thick with dread and pulled open the heavy steel door to the basement. It was pitch black. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and old metal. I clicked on the flashlight and its beam sliced through the dusty darkness. The basement was mostly filled with tenants' storage cages, but tucked away in the far back corner was a small utility room. Only family had the key. I fumbled with the key ring, my hands shaking again, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was adrenaline. I found the small tarnished brass key, the one Grandma had given me years ago with the instruction to keep it somewhere safe. I slid it into the old lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. I pushed the door open. The room was tiny, containing just a workbench, a few rusty tools, and shelves stacked high with old cans of paint. It looked exactly as it had the last time I was down here with her. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered into the gloom. "I'm here. What's the secret?" I swept the flashlight beam around the room. Nothing but cobwebs and thick layers of dust. A pang of disappointment hit me. Maybe I was just chasing ghosts. Maybe I was just a fool. And then I saw it. On the floor, tucked away under the workbench, was a single loose floorboard. It wasn't obvious at all. You'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. But the wood was a slightly different shade, worn smooth in a way that suggested it had been handled many times. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete. I shoved the heavy workbench aside. Its legs screamed against the floor. I dug my fingernails into the crack around the board. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, ignoring the splinter that pierced my thumb. With a loud cracking sound, the board finally popped free. I shone the flashlight into the dark space beneath. There was a box, a simple gray metal lockbox, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, was nestled inside, coated in a fine layer of dust. I reached in and lifted it out. It was surprisingly heavy. I sat back on my heels, cradling the box in my lap. A piece of yellowed masking tape was stuck to the lid. On it, in Grandma Iris's familiar, shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "For when it's time." My breath hitched. It was time. I tried the latch, but it was locked. I didn't have a key. I scanned the room. On the workbench was a large, flathead screwdriver. I grabbed it. "Sorry, Grandma," I muttered, jamming the tip of the screwdriver into the lock mechanism. I put my weight into it, twisting hard. Metal grated against metal. I grunted with the effort. Pop. The lock gave way. The lid sprang open. I aimed the flashlight inside. Papers, stacks and stacks of old papers and yellowed envelopes. And lying right on top was a thick document bound in a formal blue cover. I picked it up. My hands were trembling so much the paper rustled. I opened it and read the first page. Then I read it again. My heart seemed to stop, then started pounding at double speed. It was a deed of trust. It was dated 4 years ago. It was notarized and signed by Iris Hayes. I scanned the dense legalese, my eyes flying down the page until they landed on the crucial paragraph. Transferring ownership of the property located at 55 Gable Street, known as the Iris Residence, fully and irrevocably to, I gasped, Charlotte Hayes. I sat there in the dark, dusty basement, staring at my own name. Grandma hadn't just given me a favorable lease. She hadn't just let me stay out of kindness. She had given me the entire building. She had moved the property out of the family's holding company and deeded it directly to me, years before she died. I flipped to the next page. A handwritten letter was attached. "My dearest Charlotte, I know your sister, and I know your father. They have always loved money more than they love people. I know that once I'm gone, they will try to sell this place or gut it and turn it into something cold. You are the only one who has my heart. You are the only one who cares about this building and the people inside it. So I am giving you this both as a burden and as a blessing. Keep this safe until you need it. I trust you to do the right thing. Love, Grandma." I pressed the letter to my chest as tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. I wasn't just a tenant. I wasn't a victim. I was the owner. Megan's rent hike. It wasn't just cruel. It was completely fraudulent. She didn't own the building. She had been operating under the assumption that Grandma had left it in the family trust. But my grandmother had been one step ahead of them all. I wiped my tears with the back of my sleeve. A fierce, Cold calm began to settle over me. I looked back into the box. Beneath the deed, there were more documents, bank statements, financial ledgers. I pulled one out. It was a record of the building's maintenance fund, which my father managed. I opened it and saw a list of withdrawals, huge withdrawals. Consulting fees, MH Developments. Renovation retainer, MH Developments. They hadn't just tried to steal the building from me. They had been actively stealing from it for years. I stood up, clutching the box to my chest like a shield. I had come down to this basement, a scared woman on the verge of losing her home. I was walking back up the stairs as the rightful owner of the Iris residence. And I was about to go to war. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I spread the contents of the metal box across my living room floor and read every last scrap of paper until the first light of dawn crept through my window. At 8 a.m., I called the library and told them I was sick. It was the first sick day I'd taken in 6 years. My hands were still shaking as I dialed the number for Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was my grandma's best friend. She lived just a few blocks away in a little row house that always smelled of lavender and old books. If anyone knew about this box, it would be her. When I knocked, Evelyn answered the door in her dressing gown. She took one look at my face, then at the metal box in my arms, and she didn't seem the least bit surprised. "Come in, Charlotte," she said gently. I sat at her small kitchen table. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice hoarse from a night of crying and reading. Evelyn poured 2 cups of hot tea. "Iris told me she was worried," Evelyn said. "She told me she didn't trust Robert's business sense, and she certainly didn't trust that sister of yours. She said she put the heart of the building in the foundation. I always figured you'd find it when things got bad enough." "They're bad, Evelyn," I said. "They raised my rent to nearly $8,000. Evelyn's teaspoon clattered against her saucer. "Those greedy, greedy people." "I have a deed," I whispered. "It says I'm the owner, but I don't know if it's real, if it will hold up against Megan's lawyers." Evelyn reached across the table and patted my hand, her skin as delicate as old parchment. "You need to see Arthur Vance. He was your grandmother's lawyer for 40 years. He's retired, but for this, he'll unretire." An hour later, I was sitting in a plush leather chair in a law office that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Arthur Vance was a portly man with wild white eyebrows that looked like agitated caterpillars. He wore a tweed jacket and had reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He didn't say a word for what felt like an eternity. He just read, methodically licking his thumb to turn the pages of the deed. Then he picked up the financial ledgers I'd found. I watched his face, my stomach in knots. What if I was wrong? What if there was some loophole? What if Megan had already done something to invalidate this? Finally, Arthur closed the folder. He removed his glasses and looked at me over the top of his desk. "Charlotte," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "This is as ironclad as it gets." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since yesterday. "It is?" "Your grandmother came to see me 4 years ago," Arthur explained. "She was very clear about her intentions. She created a new, separate legal entity to hold the property title. She then transferred that title to you, effective upon her death, but with a special clause that kept the transfer silent until you asserted your claim. In essence, she hid the ownership in your back pocket, just waiting for you to realize it was there." "So, Megan owns nothing," Arthur stated plainly. "Your parents own nothing. The Hayes Holdings LLC they're operating is nothing more than a management company. They were hired to manage the building. They do not own a single brick of it." "They raised the rent," I said. "They sent out eviction notices." "Completely illegal," Arthur said. They have no legal authority to set rental rates without the express signature of the owner, and that owner is you. He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. But Charlotte, there's more here. He tapped the ledger from the box. I've been cross-referencing these withdrawal slips you found with the public filings of their management company. Your grandmother kept copies of every report they sent her. She suspected they were skimming off the top. Skimming? I asked. Look at this. Arthur pointed to a line item. Roof replacement, $45,000. That's dated 2 years ago. Was the roof ever replaced? No, I said immediately. We had it patched. It cost maybe $2,000. I hired the contractor myself. Precisely, Arthur said. Your father and sister billed the estate for $45,000. They paid a shell corporation called M.H. Developments. M.H. Developments, M.H. Megan Hayes. My stomach churned. They were billing for jobs that were never done. It gets worse, Arthur said grimly. Boiler replacement, window modernization, facade cleaning. Over the last 5 years, they have systematically siphoned nearly $250,000 from the building's maintenance fund. Money that should have gone to upkeep went straight into your sister's bank account. I felt like I was going to be sick. I knew they were greedy. I never imagined they were actual criminals. This is fraud, Arthur said flatly. This is embezzlement. If we take this to court, Charlotte, your sister won't just lose a building she never owned. She could go to prison. The room was silent except for the loud ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Prison? My sister. The same girl who taught me how to ride a bike. The one who used to chase away bullies on the playground before she discovered designer labels and social climbing. She did this to herself, I said, and my voice sounded foreign to me, cold and detached. She looked me right in the eye yesterday and smirked while she was making me homeless. She smirked, Mr. Vance. Then we proceed? Arthur asked. We proceed, I said, but not just yet. I want to let them walk right into it. I beg your pardon? They're coming to the building tomorrow, I explained. Megan is bringing a team of inspectors. She wants to intimidate the other tenants to flex her power. I stood up, feeling a strength I had never known before. I want her to play her full hand, I said. I want everyone in that building to see exactly who she is. And then I want to bring the hammer down. Arthur smiled. It was a grim, predatory smile. I'll have the necessary court filings ready to go. You just give the word. I walked out of his office and into the bright afternoon sun. The noise of the city seemed to wash over me. I clutched the folder to my chest. I went back to the Iris residence. The atmosphere was even more grim than before. People were moving with their heads down, a quiet despair hanging over them. I saw Mrs. Peterson carrying a box of old novels toward the dumpster. Mrs. Peterson, I called out, don't throw those away. She looked up at me with dull, exhausted eyes. I can't take them with me, Charlotte, the new place. It's just a single room. There's no space for books. I gently took the box from her hands. Put them back in your apartment. Please, just trust me. Trust you? She asked, her voice filled with doubt. Charlotte, your family's name is on that eviction notice. I know, I said, but I am promising you, no one is leaving this building. Just give me 2 more days. Can you do that? She stared at me for a long moment. She must have seen something new in my eyes. Maybe it was the same stubborn glint her friend Iris used to have. She nodded slowly. 2 days. I went upstairs to my apartment. I didn't pack a single thing. I put the deed in a secure place. Then I sat by my window and watched the street below. I waited for the wolves. The next morning, the wolves arrived in a sleek black SUV. It was just after 9 a.m. I was sipping coffee by the window as I saw Megan step out. She wore oversized sunglasses and carried a clipboard like a scepter. My father was with her, looking impatient. Trailing them were 3 men in hard hats and high-visibility vests. They weren't city officials. They were private contractors. I watched as Megan pointed up at the building, gesturing toward my windows, then making a sharp, slicing motion with her hand. A hot fire ignited in my chest. I walked out into the hallway. I could already hear a commotion starting down in the lobby. I went downstairs. The lobby was crowded. Megan and her crew were effectively blocking the entrance. A group of tenants had gathered, looking scared and vulnerable in their bathrobes and pajamas. "Excuse me," Megan was saying, her voice loud and cutting. "We need access to every unit. This is a mandatory structural assessment." "We didn't receive a 24-hour notice," a clear voice said. I looked over. It was Chloe Tran from 4B. She was usually quiet, a young woman who worked for a local nonprofit. But right now, she was standing directly in front of Mrs. Peterson, blocking Megan's path. "This is an emergency assessment," Megan lied without blinking. "We have reason to believe the load-bearing walls have been compromised. If you refuse us entry, we will be forced to have the fire marshal condemn the entire building immediately." It was a bluff, a nasty, cruel one. She was trying to scare them into letting her contractors measure their homes for her luxury renovation plans. "That is a lie," Chloe said, holding her phone up, clearly recording. "You are harassing tenants." "I am the landlord," Megan shouted, her cool, professional mask beginning to crack. She took a step toward Chloe. "And you will be trespassing on private property if you do not move aside. Do you want to be evicted today? Because I can make that happen." My father stepped forward. "Now listen here, young lady. We are doing this for your own safety. Now move." The other tenants flinched, shrinking back. They were terrified. They didn't know the law. They just saw wealthy, powerful people with clipboards and hard hats, and they felt utterly helpless. I stood near the back of the lobby by the stairwell. No one had seen me yet. I watched as Megan bullied Mrs. Peterson. "Unit 2B, Megan said to one of her contractors. "Start there. It's the smallest unit. We'll probably be knocking down that wall to expand the bathroom for 2A anyway." Mrs. Peterson let out a small, wounded sob. "My home. It's a structure, not a person," Megan snapped at her. "Now get out of the way." I couldn't watch anymore. "Megan," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the tension in the room. Megan spun around. She whipped off her sunglasses. When she saw me, she rolled her eyes. "Charlotte, good. Do you have the key to the basement? Dad misplaced his. We need to check the foundation." I walked through the cluster of tenants. They parted from me like the Red Sea. I could feel their eyes on me, suspicious, angry, and a little hopeful. I stopped about 3 feet from my sister. "You can't go into their apartments, Megan," I said calmly. "They have tenant rights." Megan let out a harsh, barking laugh. "I have the deed, Charlotte. I have the power. What do you have? A library card? Get out of my way and go pack your things." "You don't have the deed," I said. The room fell silent. "Excuse me?" Megan stepped closer, her expensive perfume filling the air. "I am the acting director of Hayes Holdings, LLC. I control this building." "You control the LLC," I corrected her. "But the LLC doesn't actually own the building." My father scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Charlotte. Of course it does. Grandma put the property in the trust." "Did she?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Did you ever actually check the title transfer records, or did you just assume?" Megan's eyes narrowed. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of doubt, but she quickly suppressed it. "I am done playing these childish games with you," Megan said. She turned to her contractors. "Break the lock on 2B if you have to. We're going in. If you touch that door, Chloe Tran said, her phone still raised, I am calling the police. This is illegal entry and harassment. Call them! Megan shrieked, finally losing her composure. Her face was bright red. Call the police! I own this place! I own you! I own all of you! The silence that followed was deafening. Megan stood there panting, slowly realizing she had just had a full-blown meltdown in front of a dozen witnesses. The tenants weren't cowering anymore. They were looking at her with open disgust. Chloe's phone was still recording. You own us? Chloe asked quietly. Is that how you view people? I see liabilities, Megan spat, and I am in the process of clearing them out. She turned her glare on me. And you are the biggest liability of all. I'm doubling your rent again, $10,000, effective immediately. Let's see you pay that on your little librarian salary. She smirked. It was the same condescending smirk from the dining room. But this time, it didn't sting. This time, I looked at her, and all I felt was a profound sense of pity. She was so confident, so sure of her power. She was standing on a trap door and had no idea I was holding the lever. Go ahead, I said softly. Do your inspection, but you will not break any locks, and you will not touch Mrs. Peterson's apartment. Megan glared at me, then shoved past me and headed for the stairs. My father followed, muttering about ungrateful children. The contractors trailed behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable. As soon as they were gone, the lobby seemed to exhale collectively. Chloe lowered her phone and looked at me. Charlotte, what was all that about? What did you mean she doesn't own it? I looked at Chloe. I looked at Mrs. Peterson, who was trembling in the corner. I looked at the Santos family. I mean, I said, my voice shaking just a little, that things are about to change. I promise. How? Marco Santos asked, his anger replaced by confusion. They're upstairs right now measuring our living room for demolition. Let them measure, I said, a cold resolve hardening in my gut. Let them draw up their plans. Let them dig their own graves. I turned to Chloe. Can you send me a copy of that video? The one where she screams that she owns us? Yeah, of course, Chloe said. Why? Because, I said. I have a meeting with my lawyer, and I think a judge is going to be very interested to see exactly what kind of landlord Megan Hayes really is. I turned and walked out the front door. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't want to hear Megan's heels clicking on my ceiling. I walked straight to the bus stop. I was going back to see Arthur Vance. It was time to call a family meeting. The inspection had been her show of power, but the meeting I was planning, that was going to be her funeral. 2 days later, the text message I was expecting arrived. It was from my mother. Family meeting. 6 p.m. at the house. Dinner. Your attendance is mandatory. We need to sign the final developer paperwork. I stared at the screen. Normally, a summons like that would make my stomach clench with anxiety. It would make me feel like a little kid being called into the principal's office. But today, I felt nothing but a serene calm. It was the calm of someone who already knows how the movie ends. I put on my nicest blazer. I packed my binder. It was a thick, black, 3-ring binder, and inside, I had meticulously organized everything. The deed, the fraudulent bank statements, the incriminating emails Arthur Vance had subpoenaed, and the video Chloe had sent me. I drove to my parents' house. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of their affluent neighborhood. It all looked so flawless from the outside. When I walked in, the dining room was set for a celebration. A bottle of Dom Perignon was chilling in an ice bucket. Architectural blueprints were unrolled across the sideboard. Megan was already there, practically glowing. She was wearing a blood-red dress, that looked like a victory statement. "You're late," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "I'm right on time," I replied, taking my usual seat at the far end of the table. My father sat at the head, and my mother was bustling around, serving a roasted chicken. "Let's eat quickly," Dad announced. "Megan has a big presentation for the investors tomorrow, and she wants to run through it with us one last time. We need to be aligned on the tenant removal timeline." "Removal," I said quietly. "Is that the official term now?" "It's an exit strategy," Megan corrected, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Don't be so bitter, Charlotte. You'll get a small cut. Once the renovations are done and we refinance, the property value is going to triple. We're all going to be incredibly wealthy." "I don't want to be wealthy," I said. "I want Mrs. Peterson to be able to live in her home." Megan slammed her wine glass down, sloshing red wine onto the white tablecloth. "Oh my God, stop it. Just stop with the bleeding heart routine. It's pathetic. Mrs. Peterson is a non-performing asset. She pays nothing. The apartment smells like mothballs. She has to go." "She is a person," I said. "She is a squatter in a gold mine," Dad said, cutting his chicken with aggressive force. "Now be quiet and listen to your sister's proposal." Megan stood and walked over to the blueprints, unrolling them with a flourish. "Okay," she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is the vision, the Iris Suites. We gut the interiors, rip out all those ancient radiators, and install central air. We knock down the walls between the smaller units to create open-concept floor plans. We add private balconies." She looked at us, her eyes gleaming with avarice. "We go from 12 small apartments to 8 luxury suites. The rent will start at $9,500 a month. We already have a tech firm interested in leasing the whole building for corporate housing." "Brilliant," my mother said, clapping her hands softly. "Just brilliant, Megan." "And the current tenants?" I asked. "Notices are out," Megan said breezily. "If they're not gone by the 30th, we have the locks changed. If any of them try to stay, we'll have the utilities cut. It's standard procedure for stubborn holdouts." "It's illegal," I said. "It's effective," she countered. "And then, once the building is cleared, my firm, MH Developments, will come in to oversee the construction." I reached down and put my hand on the black binder on the floor beside me. "MH Developments," I said. "That's a fascinating company, Megan." She froze, but only for a second. "What are you talking about?" "I mean," I said, lifting the heavy binder and placing it on the table with a solid thud, "that it seems to be a very profitable company, especially for one that doesn't appear to do any actual work." The room fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. "What is that?" Dad asked, pointing at the binder. I opened it, taking my time. I turned the pages slowly. "I've been doing some light reading," I said. "I went through the building's old financial records, the ones Grandma kept." "Grandma was getting senile," Megan snapped. She had no idea what she was looking at. "She knew enough," I said, pulling out a printed spreadsheet. "She knew that 3 years ago, you billed the estate $45,000 for a roof replacement that never happened. I patched that roof myself, remember? It cost $2,000. Megan's face went white. That was a consultation fee for assessing the structural integrity of the roof. $45,000 to look at some shingles, I asked, and here $12,000 for boiler maintenance in August. The heat wasn't even on in August. And here $8,000 for landscaping. Megan, the building doesn't have a yard. It has a concrete sidewalk. My father stood up, his face turning a deep shade of red. "Charlotte, put that away. You don't understand corporate finance." "I understand theft," I said, looking my father directly in the eye. "You co-signed these checks, Dad. You let her bleed the maintenance fund dry. That money was meant to keep the building safe for its residents. Instead, it went into her pocket." "It went to the family!" Dad shouted. "Megan is building this family's future." "She is stealing," I said calmly, "and she is bullying senior citizens." "You're just jealous," Megan hissed, leaning across the table, her face contorted with rage. "You have always been jealous of me because I'm a winner. I get things done. You're just a sad little librarian living in my building." I closed the section of the binder on her fraud. I took a deep breath. "That's the other thing," I said. "It's not your building." Megan laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "We've been over this. I am the executor." "You're the executor of the holding company," I said, "but the building isn't in the holding company." I reached into the binder's front pocket and pulled out the blue folder. The deed. I slid it across the polished table. It came to a stop right next to the champagne bottle. "Read it," I said. Whitney stared at the blue document as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't want to touch it. "Read it," I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. She picked it up, her hands trembling. She opened the cover. I watched the color drain from her face. It was like watching a light go out. She went from furious red to a sickly gray in under 3 seconds. "No," she whispered. This has to be a fake." "It's notarized," I said. "It was filed with the city clerk's office 4 years ago. Arthur Vance has the original." "What does it say?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "Megan, what does it say?" Megan looked up, her eyes wide with a panic I had never seen in her before. "She left it to her," Megan whispered. "She left the entire building to Charlotte, sole ownership." "That's impossible!" Dad yelled, snatching the paper from Megan's hand. He read it, his lips moving silently. Then he dropped it onto the table as if it had burned him. He looked at me in pure disbelief. "You own it," he said. "I own it," I confirmed. "I've owned it for 4 years. Grandma wanted to make sure you could never sell it. She knew exactly who you were." I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. "So here's the new reality," I said. "There will be no luxury suites. There will be no evictions, and there will be no $9,500 rent." I looked at Megan, who had collapsed back into her chair, looking small and broken. "And you," I said to her, "are fired. You are no longer the property manager. You are banned from the premises. If you set foot on that property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." "You can't do that to your own sister," Mom cried. "Charlotte, be reasonable. She has plans. She has loans." "That sounds like her problem," I said coldly. "She can pay back her loans with the $250,000 she stole from the maintenance fund." Megan looked up, her eyes wet with tears. "You're destroying me. The investors, they'll sue me. I'll be bankrupt." "You tried to make me homeless," I said. "You tried to make Mrs. Peterson homeless. You smirked at me while you did it, Megan. You laughed." I picked up my binder. "You can't sell what you don't own," I said. "And you don't own a single brick." The room was silent. The champagne sat unopened. The chicken was getting cold. "I'm leaving now," I said. "And Dad, don't bother texting me again." I turned to walk away, but the show wasn't over yet. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime echoing through the dead silent house. My father looked bewildered. Who could that be? "That," I said, "is the rest of the surprise." Dad walked to the front door and opened it. Arthur Vance stood on the doorstep. He wasn't wearing his cozy tweed jacket. He was in a sharp, dark suit, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man and a woman in plain gray suits, carrying briefcases. They had badges clipped to their belts. "Robert," Arthur said, his voice deep and serious. "We need to come in." "Arthur!" My father stepped back, confused. "What is this?" Arthur walked straight into the dining room. He didn't glance at the food. He looked directly at Megan. "Megan Hayes?" the woman in the gray suit asked. Megan stood up, knocking her chair over in the process. "Who are you?" "I'm Investigator Davis with the City Housing Authority," the woman said. "And this is Detective Miller from the Economic Crimes Division." "Crimes?" Mom squeaked, grabbing my father's arm. "We've received a substantial file of evidence regarding the gross mismanagement of the Iris residence property," Arthur said, giving me a slight affirmative nod. "Embezzlement of funds, falsification of financial records, and illegal tenant harassment." "This is absurd," Megan stammered, trying to put on her usual haughty demeanor, but it crumbled instantly. "This is a family argument." "My sister is just being overly dramatic." "The documents we have aren't dramatic, Ms. Hayes," Investigator Davis said, opening her briefcase. "We have bank records of checks written to shell companies registered in your name. We have multiple witness statements regarding threats of illegal eviction, and we have this video." She pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. The video Chloe had recorded began to play. Megan's distorted, screeching voice filled the elegant dining room. "I own this place. I own you. I own all of you. I see liabilities, and I am clearing them out." On the screen, she looked unhinged, vicious. My parents watched, horrified. They had always seen Megan as the polished professional, the success story. Now they were watching her scream at elderly people and threaten to break down doors. That was taken out of context," Megan said, but her voice was a mere whisper. "It will be context for a judge," Detective Miller said coolly. "Ms. Hayes, we are serving you with a subpoena. You are officially under investigation for grand larceny and felony fraud. You need to come with us to the station to answer some questions." "Now?" Megan asked, her knees seeming to give way as she slumped against the table. "I can't go to a police station. I have a luncheon tomorrow." "You won't be making that luncheon," the detective said. They moved toward her. It all happened very quickly. They didn't put her in handcuffs, but they flanked her, treating her like the criminal she was. Megan looked desperately at Dad. "Daddy, do something." My father just stood there, pale and trembling. He looked at the ledgers on the table. He looked at the police. He looked at me. He realized in that moment that if he defended her, he would be implicated too. He had signed the checks. He was an accomplice. Dad stammered. He looked away. He turned his back on his favorite child. "I had no idea. She handled all the accounts. I just signed whatever she gave me." Megan gasped, a sound of pure, raw betrayal. "Daddy!" "I didn't know," he repeated, louder this time, speaking directly to the detectives. "I was misled. I watched them. This family that prided itself on loyalty and strength as they turned on each other to save their own skin." "Let's go, Ms. Hayes," the detective said. They led her out of the room. As she walked past me, she looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and full of terror. She didn't look like a shark anymore. She looked like a little girl who had shattered a priceless vase and knew there was no way to glue it back together. I didn't say a word. I just watched her go. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was full. It wasn't the criminal trial yet. That was still to come. This was a civil hearing about the management of the building and the restraining order I had filed against Megan. But the judge wanted to hear the whole story. I sat in the front row. Behind me, the benches were packed. Mrs. Peterson was there, the Santos family, Chloe Tran, even the guy from the corner bodega who remembered my grandma. Megan sat at the defense table, looking like a ghost of her former self. Mrs. Peterson was the first to testify. "She was a liability," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "She told me she would put my belongings on the street. I have lived in that apartment for 30 years. I always pay my rent." Then Marco Santos took the stand. "She threatened my pregnant wife. She told us she would cut our power. We have a 2-year-old son." Then Chloe testified, and she played the video again. The sound of Megan's screaming echoed off the high, wood-paneled ceiling of the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, watched the video with a frown that etched deep lines into her forehead. When all the testimony was finished, the judge looked down at Megan. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "in my 20 years on the bench, I have seldom seen such a callous and profound disregard for human dignity. You treated these people like refuse to be swept aside for your own financial gain." Megan just stared down at her hands. "The court hereby recognizes Charlotte Hayes as the sole and legal owner of the property at 55 Gable Street," the judge ruled. "All eviction notices are immediately rendered null and void. Furthermore, due to the overwhelming evidence of fraud, Megan Hayes is stripped of any and all management authority and is ordered to repay $250,000 to the estate." The gavel came down with a sharp, final sound. Crack. A cheer erupted from the gallery. Mrs. Peterson was crying with relief. Chloe was high-fiving Marco. I didn't cheer. I just felt a heavy, quiet wave of relief wash over me. The storm had passed. The wolves were gone. I walked out of the courtroom into a hallway filled with bright afternoon sun. Arthur Vance was waiting for me. He shook my hand firmly. "You did good, Charlotte. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud." "I hope so," I said. I walked outside into the fresh air. It tasted sweet. Megan came out a few minutes later, followed by her lawyer. She stopped when she saw me. She looked exhausted, defeated. All the arrogance had been stripped away. "Charlotte," she began. "Don't," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Just don't. Mom and Dad are selling the house," she said quietly, "to pay for my legal fees and the restitution." "I know," I said. "They blame me," she said. "They say I tricked them." "They let you," I said simply. "They were happy to be tricked as long as they thought the money was flowing their way." She looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in a decade. "I'm sorry." It was a small, weak, pathetic thing, a tiny Band-Aid on a gaping wound. "I know you are," I said, "but you're not sorry you did it, Megan. You're just sorry you got caught." I turned around and walked away from her. I walked toward the bus stop, toward the city, toward the brick building on the corner that was waiting for me. I had a lot of work to do. The roof needed real repairs this time. The boiler needed a full service. And I had a building full of people who needed to know that they were finally safe. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the keeper of the keys. And for the first time in my life, I was heading home to a place that was truly and completely mine. The days following the court hearing were strange. You expect some kind of victory parade, but real life isn't a movie. It was quiet. It was just work. I went back to the Iris residence the next morning. I stood in the lobby, and the air itself felt different. It no longer smelled of fear and tension. It smelled of lemon polish and freshly brewed coffee. Mrs. Peterson was the first person I saw. She was waiting for me by the mailboxes. She didn't say a word. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. She was so short, her head barely came up to my shoulder, but she held on like I was a life raft. Thank you, she whispered into my coat. I unpacked my books, Charlotte. I put them all back on the shelves. Good, I said, patting her back gently. That's where they belong. But there was still a huge mess to clean up. Megan hadn't just threatened people. She had systematically neglected the building for years while lining her pockets. I called a tenant meeting that evening. We all gathered in the lobby. Everyone was there. The Santos family, Mr. Gable in his wheelchair, Chloe, the college students from the top floor. I stood on an old wooden crate so everyone could see me. Okay, I said, here's the truth. The building is safe, no one is being evicted, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. I held up a clipboard. The roof in 4C has a leak, I said. The radiator in 2A makes a horrible clanging noise all night. The front door lock is sticking. I know about all of it, and now we're going to fix it. But I need you all to be patient with me. The money, well, we're getting it back, but it's going to take time. We can help, Marco Santos said, holding his toddler, Leo. I'm a carpenter, Charlotte. You buy the wood and I'll fix the drafty windows. I can paint, a student named Alex said. My roommates and I can take care of the hallways. I'll bake cookies, Mrs. Peterson announced firmly. Workers need to eat. I looked around the room. A week ago, these people were isolated individuals living in fear. Now they were a team. My biological family had tried to tear this place apart. But these people, my real community, were ready to rebuild it with their own hands. Okay, I said, a lump forming in my throat. Let's get to work. The hardest part wasn't in the building. It was the crushing silence from my parents. A week later, I had to drive out to the suburbs to get the last of my things. I didn't want to see them, but I needed my winter coats and a few boxes I'd stored in their garage. The house looked dark. A big for sale sign was already staked into the front lawn. It looked stark and ugly against the perfectly green grass. I let myself in with my old key. The house felt hollow, even with all the furniture still in place. It was like a museum that was about to be shut down for good. I found my mother in the kitchen, carefully wrapping crystal wine glasses in newspaper and placing them in a box. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her hair wasn't styled. She was wearing a bathrobe in the middle of the afternoon. Charlotte, she said without looking at me. She just kept wrapping. Mom, I said. Your father is at the lawyer's office, she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. They're discussing the final settlement. We have to liquidate his retirement accounts to pay the restitution and the legal fees. I know, I said. She stopped wrapping and placed her hands flat on the counter. Was it worth it? She asked. She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were ice cold. Destroying your sister? Humiliating your father and me? Was it worth it? All for some old brick building? I felt a familiar pang of guilt. The little girl inside me wanted to apologize, to fix it, to make her happy again. But then I pictured Mrs. Peterson crying in the lobby. I remembered Megan's smirk. I didn't destroy her, Mom, I said. She broke the law. You both let her. You watched her do it. We were a family, she said, her voice rising. Families are supposed to stick together. You don't take your own sister to court. Families don't steal from each other, I countered. And families don't try to make each other homeless. I walked over to the refrigerator. There was a photo of us held up by a magnet from a family vacation we took a decade ago. We were all smiling. It looked so fake now. I just came for my things, I said, and then I'll be gone. Go then, she said, turning her back on me to go back to her glasses. You made your choice. You have your building. You don't need us anymore. I packed the last of my boxes in silence. I carried them out to my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rear-view mirror. My mother was standing at the window watching me go. I didn't turn back. It hurt. It hurt like a deep, clean wound. But it was the kind of pain you feel when you're cutting out an infection, the kind of pain that lets the healing begin. Spring arrived slowly that year. The gray slush finally melted away, and the trees lining the street began to sprout tiny green buds. The Iris residence was waking up too. For 3 months, the building was filled with noise. Not the sound of arguments, but the sounds of progress. Hammers banging, drills whirring, music playing from portable radios. I hired Marco Santos to do all the carpentry. He was a true craftsman. He stripped the years of cheap, ugly paint off the banisters, revealing the beautiful dark oak underneath. He fixed the wobbly steps on the main staircase. I used the first restitution check from Megan's seized assets to have the boiler completely overhauled. When the new system hummed to life without a single clank or groan, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. One Saturday in April, we organized a community day to repaint the lobby. It was incredible. Chloe brought a dozen donuts. Mrs. Peterson made a giant pot of coffee. Even Mr. Gable came out to supervise from his wheelchair. I was up on a ladder, rolling a warm cream color over the dingy gray walls Megan had chosen years ago. Evelyn Reed walked in, carrying a large potted plant, a big leafy fern. "For the corner," she said. "Iris always loved ferns." I climbed down the ladder, my clothes speckled with paint. "It's looking better, don't you think?" "It feels better," Evelyn said, looking around the brightened space. "It feels like her again." She walked over to the wall where we had hung a collection of old photos. I had framed a copy of the very first deed, the one my grandpa and grandma had signed back in 1960. "She knew you could do it," Evelyn said softly. "She told me once, you know. Charlotte is soft," she used to say, "but she's soft like water, and water wears down stone in the end." I smiled. "I don't feel very soft anymore, Evelyn." "No," she said. "You feel steady. That's even better." Chloe walked over, wiping paint from her hands onto a rag. "Hey, landlord," she teased. It had become her nickname for me. It was a joke, but it was also a badge of honor. "The guy from the city is here for the final inspection." I wiped my hands and went outside. The city inspector was a tall, no-nonsense man with a clipboard. He wasn't one of Megan's paid-off cronies. He was the real deal. He walked through the entire building. He checked the new fire alarms. He checked the boiler room. He inspected the patched roof. I followed him, my stomach fluttering with nerves. I knew we had done good work, but I still had that lingering fear that someone could take it all away. He finished his inspection in the basement. He clicked his pen and looked at me. "You've done a remarkable amount of work here, Ms. Hayes," he said. "We all have," I replied. "Well," he said, handing me a signed slip of paper. "It passes, with flying colors. This building is in better shape than most of the new condos going up across the street." I took the paper. "Pass." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. When he left, I went back into the lobby. "We passed," I announced. The whole room erupted in cheers. Marco Santos popped a bottle of sparkling cider. It wasn't Dom Perignon, but it tasted 1,000,000 times better. That night, I sat alone in my quiet apartment. The faint smell of fresh paint was clean and hopeful. I opened my laptop. There was an email from Arthur Vance. "Charlotte, just an update. The sale of your parents' house closed today. The restitution funds have now been fully transferred to the Iris residence account. Your sister's criminal trial for fraud is set for next month. She is expected to take a plea deal, probation and community service. She will be barred from holding a real estate license in this state for 10 years. It is over. I closed the laptop. It was over. Megan had lost her career. My parents had lost their house. They had lost their status. But I hadn't done any of this to punish them. I had done it to protect this. I walked to my window and looked out at the quiet street. The street lights cast a warm glow. I saw the light go off in Mrs. Peterson's apartment. She was safe. She was sleeping peacefully in her own bed. I wasn't just a librarian anymore. I wasn't just the quiet little sister. I was the guardian of this small corner of the world. A year later, it was a perfect spring morning, the kind of day where the air is crisp and the sun feels warm on your skin. I was sitting on the front steps of the Iris residence, a mug of hot tea warming my hands. The heavy oak door opened behind me. It was Sophia Santos, pushing a stroller. Inside was their new baby, a little girl they had named Iris. When they told me her name, I had cried for a solid hour. "Morning, Charlotte," Sophia said. She looked tired but happy. "Beautiful day." "It really is," I said. "How's that radiator treating you?" "Silent as a lamb," she smiled. "You worked some kind of magic on that thing." She continued down the street, the wheels of the stroller clicking softly on the pavement. I took a sip of my tea. The building behind me felt alive. I could hear the faint sound of music coming from a third-floor window. I could hear the plumbing hum as someone started their morning shower. It wasn't just bricks and mortar anymore. It was a living, breathing thing. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. I tensed for a moment, a flicker of old fear. But it wasn't Megan. The window rolled down and I saw my father. He looked older, much older. He was living in a downtown condo now. I'd heard he was doing some consulting work, but not much. He looked at the building. He took in the fresh paint, the flower boxes overflowing with bright red geraniums, the sparkling clean windows. Then he looked at me. I didn't stand up. I just sat there and watched him. He opened his mouth as if he were about to say something. Maybe, "Good job." Maybe, "I'm sorry." Maybe just, "It looks nice." But he didn't. He just gave a stiff, awkward nod. Then he rolled the window up and drove away. I watched the car disappear around the corner. It didn't hurt this time. I just felt a strange, sad pity for him. He had spent his entire life chasing money, and he had ended up with nothing but a fancy car and a lonely apartment. I had this. I stood up and walked back inside. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. The sound was solid, secure. I walked through the lobby, running my hand along the smooth, dark wood of the banister as I climbed the stairs. On the landing between the first and second floors, a sunbeam was cutting through a window, illuminating the dancing dust motes in the air. I paused. In the quiet, I could almost hear her voice. "Grandma Iris." "You protected what matters, Charlotte." I smiled to myself. "I did, Grandma," I whispered. "I really did." I walked up to my apartment and put my key in the lock. My family had failed me. They had broken my heart and tried to sell my home. But I had learned that legacy isn't about blood. Legacy is about what you build and who you protect. I opened the door and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked a familiar welcome. In that quiet moment, with the sun pouring in and the building breathing around me, justice didn't feel like a battle I had won. It felt exactly like coming home.